gather we must be live, since it says live on the screen. Sorry about that. That was a bit of a lumpy start. I had a theme tune that I wanted to just play right at the beginning, just to make you all feel at home. You getting that, Matt? Does that send like horrified shivers of post-traumatic stress through your lithe and athletic body, Matt Rendell?
It makes me feel,
Yeah, it does. Let me do a formal introduction. Hello, thank you very much for clicking on the link and joining in. This is the first of what hopefully will become a sort of semi-permanent series of various different events called the Roadbook Editors Meeting. And just to get the ball rolling, and because I think it will be fun, I've basically assembled around about 33% of ITV's Tour de France team, which means one bloke, and you'll recognize him. He's joining us live from presumably a 7-star hotel in the United Arab Emirates, which of course is not a controversial place to be whatsoever. And his name is Matt Rendell.
Applause. Wow, deafening applause. Oh, that's so kind of you. That's
okay.
So yeah, there is actually a 7-star hotel, but I'm not actually in it. Yeah, and God, you look sort of tanned, and can you see how white I look? That's because I've been in a commentary booth and I haven't seen the sun at all. But it's, as you know, I do quite a lot of work for RCS, for the Italian race organizers, and it's just sort of amazing and heartwarming and brilliant to see loads of friends who work at the races, and there's quite a lot of people who haven't actually had any income, and they work in the bike race industry, and their personnel and their staff and their freelancers and so on. So it's great to know that they're actually making a buck, as well as watching some really quite compelling racing as well. I don't know if you folks out there have been watching it, but no, we've had really a few great stages and some wind and echelons and stuff, loads of stuff, enormous quantities of stuff, much of it involving Tadej Pogacar.
Yeah, there has been an enviable, I have to say, there has been an enviable amount of stuff going on at the UAE Tour, Matt. I've commentated on about 3 editions of that, of the Dubai Tour, the Abu Dhabi Tour, and I haven't once had any crosswinds. You've had plenty. But really, I mean, we don't want to dwell on the UAE Tour. It kind of divides opinion a little bit, doesn't it? People aren't quite sure whether I think it's just because it's in February and it's one of the first televised races of the year, especially in a year where there's been no Tour Down Under or all the other cancellations. I think people just crave watching bike racing, so they'll have to settle for the UAE Tour. And to be fair, because it's a World Tour race, it's packed with all the biggest names in the sport, isn't it?
Unbelievable. And I mean, just sprinters. The only one who isn't here is Arnaud Démare, but everyone else is. And you know that the way that we've got used to saying over about the past 18 months, really, since Pascal Ackermann came slightly off the boil, we've got used to saying, look, that there are kind of 6, 8, 10 top sprinters, and you can't really differentiate between them.
And it's not true anymore.
No, it's not. Because that man, Sam Bennett, he's twice done this kind of maneuver where he'll nip through a gap, sort of obliquely, and that frees whoever's just behind him of that enormous.
Whoever's just behind him means the entire train of other sprinters, doesn't it? Because they all pick his wheel now, and but
absolutely. Yeah,
you're right.
And then he does this, and I'm not kidding, this Cavendish-like 3 or 4 turns of the pedal, pushing a mass. His legs are so strong, and he just goes whoom, warp speed, and everyone else is, left trailing. And this amazing 23-year-old David Decker, who's had 4th place and 2 second places. To tell the truth, he's been fabulously impressive, but I don't think he's really come out of Sam's slipstream yet, because everyone who does, it's like a parachute opening at the back of a jet, and they just go woof like that and disappear it's amazing. And Michael Murku, last mention on the subject. Well, best laid out man in the world on today's showing.
But
on this week's.
But that's what Quickstep do, right?
Yeah.
Cavendish, people think kind of when Cavendish went to Quickstep that he was a bit underwhelming, which isn't true. If you look at the statistics, you know, he was so sensational with HTC that he couldn't possibly make, you know, because of the way the peloton was back then. He went to Quickstep and he carried on winning. I think in his first year, though, he was there for 3 years. He had 18 wins, and the following year it was 14, and it's, you know, all at Grand Tours and bits and pieces like that. Subsequently to him being there, Viviani went there and became a world-class, unbeatable sprinter. Moved on, nothing.
Yeah.
Marcel Kittel went to Quickstep from wherever he was before. Where was he? That
Somewhere.
team, Giant Shimano, whatever they were called, and had some of his best years with Quickstep.
Yeah.
Moved on to Katusha and collapsed. And Sam Bennett, who's been, you know, progressing through the Endura Bora team all the way through to his big transfer to, suddenly becomes the best in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, they do transform a sprinter's career. It's quite extraordinary.
They're an amazing production line, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and one of the things, I'm actually taking some notes. We're going to put up some thoughts, as you put some thoughts up on the Tour de la Provence. I've got some thoughts about the UAE Tour. We'll put them up on the Roadbook website, hopefully tomorrow night, if I manage to have any thoughts. No, I've got thousands of thoughts, if it's putting them down. But one last thing, I've forgotten what I was going to say, but anyway.
I knew you'd forget it. Oh, yeah, Pogacar, yeah.
So ridiculous, because this goes against everything I've said down the year and kind of slightly narked people a bit, sort of saying, yeah, you know, but winning in the first race of the season isn't the same as winning in July, so don't draw so many conclusions. But there's this bit of me that says it is utterly stupid and ridiculous to say that Pogacar has to be the out-and-out favourite to win the Tour de France on the strength of what he's done in the UAE Tour. On the other hand, the other part of me says, yeah, but it would be utterly cowardly to come to any other conclusion after what you've seen. I mean, Adam Yates was absolutely brilliant, but Pogacar just gives you this feeling that he can go deeper and he can go deeper. And if he needs to, he can go infinitely and so much deeper than you can. And, well, I mean, he's just amazing, just amazing.
The thing about the future is that it hasn't happened yet. And
it's
therefore,
not to see, is it?
And therefore you can't say with any certainty. Now, listen, Matt, let's not you. I'm sure we'll come back to the UAE Tour, because I want to talk to you about Colombia and your incredibly subtly promoted book. Yeah,
what are you talking about?
Look at that. So I want to talk to you about that, and then we've got a bunch of questions that I can see coming in. We've got lots of questions to get through. So that is the real thrust of the editors' meeting today, because I want it to involve. Can I use a really trite marketing phrase? The road book community. And there are prizes available. All that sort of thing, as I've said endlessly on Twitter over the last couple of days, trying to drum up support.
I just want to apologise for this whole.
No, you don't.
I look like I look like I'm just poking my head through the curtains in a Morecambe and Wise. That's how I feel like, except not as amusing.
Rendell.
Yeah.
Why did you write Colombia es Pasión?
Why did I write it? Isn't that obvious?
Money.
I had
money. That's dealt with that one. The second one.
Research. Hold on. Did my market research. I saw my focal groups, right? The Da Vinci Code has sold 180 million copies around the world, right? And how am I going to challenge that? Ned, it's obvious. It's obvious.
Okay.
And the other reason, other than pure mercenary commercialism, is that there's things that writers say, oh, look at that stereo, don't get too much blood sugar and the audience will be collapsing. But the other thing already, is that, to be fair, as writers tend to say, I wrote it because I wanted to understand some stuff. So writing is good for working things out. But the real reason is because I was so kind of overwhelmed with the story of all this stuff that's going on, Nairo and all the way through to Egan. And there are so many life stories that, and they're extraordinary life stories, and they interweave with an incredible moment in the life of a nation, which was a peace process after years and years and years and years of sometimes blood-curdling violence, that I thought to myself, apart from my naked greed, about which I'm joking, obviously, but the real reason is that I felt that this book had to exist. And if I didn't write it, it sounds stupid, if I didn't write it, it wouldn't exist, and it has to exist. And actually, my publisher won't thank me for saying this, but if it doesn't, please, I'm sort of doing this because I'm like negotiating my wages, because I work really hard, and I'd really like you to buy a copy because I think you'd really like it. And also because I do need the money, but also, even if no one buys it and no one reads it, and well, not if no one reads it, I want people to read it, but even if there's just one copy that's read by 50,000 people, I want it to exist, and then the world will decide what to do with it. But I think the story and the reality merits the existence of this book, and that's why I wrote it. Yeah.
I mean, it's great. And you're quite right. It's the story of all these riders and the way that they interweave with the story of modern Colombia. And it's completely fascinating and immaculately researched. And it's the product of decades of association with that country, Matt, as people know.
You're very kind.
Two riders, though. Let's just narrow it right down to two riders I want to talk to that. One is Rigoberto Uran.
Yeah.
Because of all the extraordinary stories that you tell, his, if you can summarize it in 45 seconds, is the most sort of unfamiliar to us, I suppose, as kind of people in this country.
Yeah. It's a story that kind of punches you in the gut. And once it's punched you there, you stay punched and you don't ever really recover. And this is a young man from a town that a lot of people had never heard of in Colombia until there was a kidnapping there involving a very high-profile politician. And then very quickly, the whole of the country became aware of this little village that was possibly the most violent place in Colombia, and over which a pall of mourning hung for many years. Rigoberto Uran, when he was 14 years old, his father wanted to protect him from the violence and the stuff that teenage kids can get up to and get drawn into. So we enrolled him in the local bike team, I think a little bit against Rigoberto's will, really. And then within weeks, 2 or 3 weeks after Rigoberto started cycling, his father was murdered, and he was shot dead by a paramilitary group for apparently no reason whatsoever. And I went to his village. It's a place I know. I've got friends there, and I've been there many times. And it's one of the most beautiful places you go. And next time you do me the great pleasure of coming to Colombia with me, we'll go there, because it's in this storybook valley, sort of a beautiful little river from a fable twisting towards a little square called the Square of the Barefooted People, with a little spire and a church and so on. And Rigoberto was just one of a whole series of children, but also parents and teachers from his school who suffered terrible tragic loss. And a few months later, he made great progress, and he was clearly prodigiously talented. And a sort of quite a big series of races of different age groups were held in his village. And Rigoberto managed to get away, won his race, came across the finish line, and he stood on the podium and he shouted the way a charming, beautiful, innocent, deeply traumatized little boy would shout. This is for my father. And I'm nearly crying now, but all around him people were weeping, and they took him to their heart. And it's the most extraordinary story, and it's really not well known because he tends not to speak about his life and not to speak in English about his life. But it's and now you can go freely to Urau, his village, and it is really beautiful, and there are wonderful people, and it's an example of just how far the world can change. And Urau has changed enormously from being somewhere that was famous and notorious for this terrible guerrilla and paramilitary violence to now a beautiful place that is associated with cycling. And in the book, I tried to speak to Rigoberto about all these parts of his past, and he was pretty clammed up, but he did help me, and he put me in touch with his mother and other people who knew him when he was a kid, and they told me his story. But I also spoke to a remarkable man called Oscar de Jota Vargas, Oscar de Jesus Vargas, who was third in the 89 Vuelta a España, and Oscar's from the same village, and in fact he's from the same little rural small holding as Rigoberto's parents, and Oscar's father was murdered as well. So he basically tells me why I shouldn't do what I'd set out to do, which was I went to Urau intent with all my pride and my, I work for ITV and I write these books and I'm I think I'm a wonderful journalist and research and all this stuff. And I went there to try and solve the mystery, the riddle of the murder of Rigoberto Uran's father. And Oscar de Jota Vargas, he said, yes, but it's not your murder to solve. You mustn't do that. It's Rigoberto's. And I learned a very great deal as a white Western European, whatever you want to say, going to the developing world and taking my ambition as a journalist. And I learned that I have to set that aside and be a lot simpler and humbler. And so that too was a wonderful learning experience, and life-changing, absolutely life-changing.
That's great stuff, Matt. Wasn't told in 45 seconds.
Sorry about that. Are we finished now?
It does beg the question, have you ever worked for television before? You know, when they say, 45 seconds to stopping talking. Anyway. Unfortunately, as a consequence of telling us all about that, you have now obliterated your allocated time in which you can talk about Colombia's Pasión, because I want to get onto some of the questions. And actually, I think you'll really appreciate, because I can see floods of them coming in, and we also had a bunch of people pre-register questions, Matt. So I think you'll really appreciate the first question, actually, that was sent in ahead of the meeting today.
Why don't you take those ridiculous glasses off? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
Yeah, sorry.
Stephen Crawford.
Okay.
Stephen Crawford. Now, here we go. Stephen Crawford.
Look at that.
I'd like to ask Matt if he has a sense of how much race or racism is an issue for the South American pro peloton. And I think, does the question go on, or I think our colleagues have just subbed it down a bit, but I think he makes quite a good point. He goes on to make in the question about when we were discussing during the Tour de France Black Lives Matter, it seemed that the South American riders were kind of excluded somehow or marginalized from that debate and could possibly should have been brought into consideration in some way. But anyway, I know this is a subject that's dear to your heart. You have a minute on this one. Tops, Matt, tops.
Yeah, it is very much an issue. When the Colombian team was participating in the 2010 Tour de l'Avenir, won by Nairo Quintana, there was not just verbal violence against them, there was physical violence against them. They are, on the whole, extremely tough and robust and resilient. But there is no doubt, and this is something that no one kind of dares say in a sense, Nairo Quintana is the darkest skinned rider ever to have stood on the podium of Grand Tour, and he's eaten his fair share of it. But if you cross Nairo or you try to bully him, you rapidly find he won't be bullied. So yes, it's absolutely an issue. And in fact, there are many riders with indigenous backgrounds, some of them very light-skinned, some of them very dark-skinned, but they know who they are, and they're very deeply aware of the difference between them and the surrounding peloton. And we should all be respectful and sensitive to them and to everyone else against whom insensitive and stupid things can be said.
Here, Matt. I found, just as you were talking and mentioning that name, I looked in my little drawer in my desk there and found this box, Matt. Do you know what I'm going to get out of this box?
I do.
Look at this. Look at this. No one outside of you and me and a few other, about 10,000 Colombians have ever seen this.
You have to hold it right up to the camera.
Look.
That is an emerald from the department of Boyacá, which is where Naira is from. And it's the department where the most beautiful and prized and expensive emeralds in the world come from. And I was accompanied to Colombia on a trip by Ned, who came with me, and I suggested to the organisers of Nairo's Gran Fondo, look, I've got my friend who's come for a long, he's never been to Colombia before. Could we sort of, hold some sort of little ceremony and sort of say to Ned, you are now an honorary boyacense from the department of Boyacá, and maybe give him a baseball cap or something? And they gave you an emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. Unbelievable. Wonderful. Wonderful.
And we just finished that ride, and I was covered in I was covered in blood because I'd been bleeding because of the altitude from both nostrils. Yeah. It was extraordinary.
Bloody snot you were covering. I remember it well.
Let's crack on. Great question, and a really good answer, that, Matt.
Yes,
Mark Nicholson. Mark Nicholson's question. We got that one. Yeah. If you'd taken this is for you, Matt. Yeah. If you'd taken up cycling early, do you think you could have been a pro?
Hold on. No, I couldn't. And I'll tell you, it's very simple why. I'll tell you a very quick anecdote. I'll try to keep it down to about 35 seconds. My friend Chepe Gonzalez, who you may remember as a great star in the 1990s, and a little boy called Daniel, who really had a gift of movement. And I said to Chepe, do you think Daniel could be a professional cyclist? And Chepe said, Daniel, no, he cries when he bangs himself and hurts himself. His cousin was on his little tricycle going down a hill, went over the top, banged his head on the curb, cut his forehead like this, so the skin was hanging over his eyes, and he didn't cry. Okay, so he might be a cyclist because he didn't cry, right? If I bang myself and hurt myself, I cry like a pathetic little nonce. Okay, so I couldn't be a professional cyclist. And but I do insist on this. The way that we write about cycling,
Time's up. Time's up. Yeah. Also, not sure that was totally appropriate language that you used there. Apologies. Never mind. Anyway,
I don't know what nonce means.
Actually. Don't go there again, Matt. Right. Good God. I know this is YouTube and it's the Wild West, but certain standards. Right. Next question comes from Claire Brill.
Okay.
I've picked out 6 questions from the Claire. Anyway, Claire, recommendations for a men's and women's race to follow to expand my cycling education. I'm in the USA. So I think Claire's quite new to following the sport. And what's a men's race and a women's race that is kind of engrossing and interesting and would enhance her experience of watching racing?
Yes. God, what would you be able to see? I mean, something. Listen, men's race and women's race. I mean, what's the Tour of Flanders for both of them for a one-day race? Because it's like one of those. It's a bit like the Super Bowl or what we have in Britain, which is the Grand National. It's one of those sporting events. It happens to be cycling, but it is just all embracing for a country and everyone. It just involves the entire community. And then for a short stage race, something I would say Tirreno. And it's one of those early spring races where you've got a bit of everything. It's like a Grand Tour, but all in just a matter of a few days, and with a long tradition and a great field of riders. Yeah,
good shout. I think you might have just buffered and stuttered a bit there. Certainly in my ear you did. So just if you missed that, Tirreno Adriatico and Paris-Nice, which run concurrently and very soon. And I'm going to be commentating on Paris-Nice for ITV. That will be my seasonal debut in the commentary booth. Next question comes from Ben Stewart.
Yep.
Ben Stewart, what do you think are the chances of Chris Froome returning to be a genuine GC contender? I suppose that depends on in which race.
Yeah.
Because he appears to be a million miles away from being a GC contender in any Grand Tour. But
I think let's suppose that Ben's talking about the Tour de France.
Yes.
So let's take that as read. And I say, look, I have to say, and this pains me to say so, I think the chances are pretty remote. And one of the reasons I say that is that, the way we've got, Egan 23 and Pogacar 22 and Remco 20, and that it doesn't stop here. You know, this isn't the end of it. It's not that you're going to have those three. It's that when Remco's 22, there are going to be 19-year-olds that make Remco look like, you know, he was sort of a trendsetter, but now a little bit out of date. Riders are coming through now, and it doesn't stop here. There's going to be a whole generation, and you know, Chris has achieved great things, and I really hope to see great things from him as in future. But it's going to be, man, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
We were discussing if he. I mean, they have to take him to the Tour de France. They will be at the Tour de France. They're a World Tour team. He's their massive investment. He will be at the Tour de France, barring further injury. But then, you know, unless his form does something miraculous or borderline impossible, then he cannot be competing in the general classification. And you even think, on the current showing, Matt, if you put him in a breakaway a la Warren Barguil or, you know, Pierre Rolland, if he can even stomach the concept of doing that, which I find possibly unlikely, then I'm not even sure he wins in those circumstances either, you know. So
one thing I'd add to that, I think that's perfectly valid, and the other thing I'd say to that is that Chris Froome is coming back from terrible injury. There are lots of riders who've had terrible injuries and have found it very difficult to come back. Remco Evenepoel as well is coming back from a very nasty injury. Egan Bernal is coming back from very difficult physical ailments. So this terrible back thing that he suffered during the Tour de France. It is not written, it is not set in stone that any of these riders will make a full recovery. Cycling is brutal, the demands it makes of the body. And, you know, they say antibiotics takes 30% out of you recovering from these injuries. Nothing is set in stone. Nothing is set in stone, sadly. But let's just, if Remco comes back, if Egan comes back, if Chris comes back, let's just give thanks for that. But,
absolutely. Simon Miller's question. Simon Miller's question. Let's do two more of the pre-sent in ones, and then we'll get to the live ones. Who are the most overlooked riders of recent years that haven't had the recognition that the roadbook results suggest? Actually, can I answer that one, Matt? It might buy you a bit of, because it's a bit of a nuanced one, this, isn't it? And requires a bit of thought. So I thought about it before we went live, and my conclusion was, in the men's peloton, quite controversially, Michał Kwiatkowski. Now, I know he's a star and a big name, but he is one of the greats, a former world champion, a monument winner. He is a huge talent who in any other team would have been leading for a decade and winning prodigious amounts of bike races. And yet we will not probably remember him in the same way that we will remember Peter Sagan and Philippe Gilbert and the rest of them, including the Grand Tour winners, because he's just been different. He's had a career which, to 85% of the time, has been sacrificed in the service of others, and that means that he's a great rider who's will be slightly overlooked in the grand scheme of things. That's my answer to that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer.
If you want, you can just agree and we can move on.
Well, I do. And well, listen, I'll agree, and we won't quite move on, so I'll agree. And that allows me to say that my career has kind of in recent years grown with Michał Kwiatkowski. I was working at the Tirreno Adriatico in 2013 when he first came through, and was very often at his sign in press conferences. And he was this young and bushy-tailed and always extremely polite and helpful person. And it was an absolute joy. It was one of my moments of the year when Richard Carapaz, who I adore and have spent time with in Ecuador, gave that stage or you know, sort of ushered Kwiatkowski forward to win his first Grand Tour stage. As you say, in any other team, he'd have had 12 Grand Tour stages behind him already. And the two riders I admire and whose company to me has been a joy over the past 5-10 years.
I'd forgotten about that. I'd forgotten about that stage. It was one of the big moments of the wonderful Tour de France last year, wasn't it? And finally, from the pre-ordered questions, so to speak, Adam Turner.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon, by the way, for the question.
It was a good one. It was a good one. Adam Turner's question: in all four no, what does it say? In all your years, which stage stands out as the toughest stage, aka the Queen stage? And I have to say, in the full question, because I've seen the full question, it can either be in the race, actually the race itself, or a day where it all went wrong for you behind the scenes and it turned into the Queen stage, the toughest stage of your working life.
Well, listen, do you know what I was talking about this today? The 2013. Am I allowed to say this? I don't even know.
I don't know.
Well, I've started now, so this could be a career-ending answer. But at the 2013, yes, 2012.
I have no idea what you're about to say.
2012 Vuelta.
Yes.
Right? It was the first Vuelta that we covered, and I was in Spain as a reporter, and it came up very, very last minute. And I got a call, would you go to Spain and be the reporter? And I said, yeah, absolutely, of course I will. Of course I'm available. God, blimey, that's a bit of anyway. So I went as a self-shooting. So I had a small, medium format television camera on my shoulder and a microphone here and a sort of, little viewfinder here so that I could make sure it was framed up and in focus. And with this microphone, I'm asking questions in sort of 3 or 4 languages. and then that's in the morning, and then driving to the stage finish and doing 5 or 6 interviews in exactly the same manner, holding this camera and with the microphone in a variety of languages. And then I had to edit everything down into a 10-minute timeline because we had exactly 10 minutes, not a second more, of satellite time. And then I had to do the subtitles, and it was quite often my hands were like this because and you've got to export it from the computer and you don't know how long it's going to take. And I drove every centimeter of the stage route, and I don't think I've ever been as tired as all my life. But the particular stage that I'm thinking of, I had my shopping list of interviews to do in the morning, and I ran around and it's a point of principle that you try and get all the interviews that you've been asked to get by London. So I ran around, did that, ran back to the car. It's boiling, it's 40 degrees at least. Run back to the car, I'm absolutely dripping with sweat. I get into the car, I say to the policeman in front of me, have I got time to go through? Because that day you had to go over the start line in order to get off route and get towards the finish. And he said, yes, if you go right now, you can go. So I inched my way through the crowd, got to the start line. And the bloke that was in charge of the start line said, you, stop, bangs his head on the bonnet. And I said, yeah, but the policeman said, and he goes, what are you doing here? You can't come here. And this policeman reached into my window and tore my accreditation off. And I just saw red, and I darted out of the car and kind of started almost fighting with a policeman and told the guy, and I said, you've got one policeman there telling me to go, another one here telling me to go. If you don't want international television to cover your event, that's absolutely fine. But at the minute, it's not even by your own intention that you're sabotaging. And I was, honestly, I nearly had a nervous breakdown on the spot. And it was just remarkable.
And
the scars are still with me, as you can hear.
What you may not know at home is that Matt is truly terrifying when he gets going. This sort of bookish professorial, facade he puts up is just that. It's a facade. He's actually a brute. So David Miller and Matt Rendell both have that in common, that they've at the Vuelta had fights with the Guardia Civil, as David did at the famous Angliru stage. I just wanted to answer a question that I just saw flashing through the live chat, and it came from I think someone called Neil or something like that, who quite rightly pushes me to say, what about a female, an overlooked female rider in the peloton? And so while, not that I wasn't listening to your every word, I was also thinking, because I can multitask, and I concluded that probably a good candidate for that would be Nicole Cook, who won everything pretty much, pre Voss's domination, but did so in an era where even less was televised than is now. And slipped through the radar in the British sporting public consciousness as well, and internationally just the same. And I think that she probably deserves to be looked at rather than overlooked, her Palmares. Right, let me get on to the questions that have been handed my way.
Wonderful. Good question.
Someone behind the scenes has been sifting through the questions as they've been coming in. So this is a little selection. Robbie Cross asks, what impact, and I'm sight reading this now, what impact do you think the pandemic will have had on cycling in developing countries like Colombia? Will the lack of racing make it harder for their pipeline of future athletes? How badly has the pandemic affected Colombia, Matt? Just to narrow it down to...
Badly. Interestingly, the former minister in charge of industry who invented the Colombia's Pasión team, Luis Guillermo Plata, he was in charge of the anti-COVID logistics and effort in Colombia, and he did a great job. But the fact remains, in the developing world, there are many people in all walks of life, but quite often everyday things like taxi drivers, and they're working in order to earn the money to pay for dinner tonight, okay? And they can't not go to work because they've got to stay at home because they've got kids to feed and so on. And it's very difficult. There's a general problem in Colombia and in many parts of the developing world, and not just the developing world, where there are very few under-23 races. Now, they managed to hold the under-23 Tour of Colombia last year, and it was a success, but it is a problem. And how it's going to affect the future. Well, the thing is that, vaccinations in the UK are going pretty incredibly quickly, and they're barely off the ground anywhere in the developing world. And that means that COVID, what we had in 2020, the developing world is going to have in 2021 and in 2022 and in 2023. And if I can say something that isn't just about cycling, because my books aren't just about cycling. The COVID is, we in the rich world are being utterly useless, because there should be colossal factories already being built in order to produce vaccines for everyone on this planet. And there shouldn't be national, there shouldn't be any of these considerations. It should just be, and it doesn't matter what it costs. And we're showing that we are bloody incapable of doing that for our own selfish reasons, and it makes my blood boil.
Got quite a lot for your money there, Robbie. Okay, let's try and keep the answers. Matt, show some broadcast discipline and try and keep your excellent answers just a little bit briefer. We've got another kind of 15 minutes or so before we wrap this up. Let's try and get through a few. Charlotte H asks, why do you think the Yates brothers don't seem to get the same love from the journalists from the UK public as others like G and Teo? And I think the very fact that Charlotte uses the nicknames G and Teo sort of says its own story. There's some truth to what Charlotte says, isn't there? I can't quite put my finger on it.
No. I mean, I think there's a thing about being articulate and fun and playing the game and the light coming on when the microphone appears in front of you. And Adam and Simon, they can be a bit buttoned up. They're very concentrated on their sport, and there are times when I think also they've ridden for a team that's often been quite overprotective of them and not wanted just to let people come in and ask the questions and see what comes out, because they're perfectly capable of it. So I think that sometimes they perhaps haven't had the opportunity to just come out and be themselves, and I think get used to just being expansive in front of a microphone, and to journalists who are there essentially to find out more and show the world what interesting and talented people they are. So I think maybe they just haven't really had the chance to get used to that sort of activity. I think it's a shame, because they're obviously prodigiously talented riders. Yep.
And also, I don't think they give a damn.
I think
Chris Ditchfield asks, how can Cav, I think we can deal with this one quite quickly. Okay. How can Cav succeed at Deconic Quickstep with Sam Bennett in such blistering form? He's not there to win bike races.
No. He's there to bring a little bit of the Alcav magic, quite a lot of the incredible know-how he's built up over the year, and contribute to Sam Bennett being even more full.
Exactly. Max Bolton asks if Ivan Sosa were to speak English with a British regional accent, which would it be?
Yeah. Well, West Country, obviously. That's all. I mean, Max, I don't know how you can ask that question. West Country, isn't it? Black Mountains. Yeah.
Do you think?
Oh, Ned.
I don't know. Well, I was thinking more kind of Wolverhampton or Dudley.
Yeah. A bit of that, but a bit of that with a bit rural as well. A bit of, kind of one father from Dudley, mother from the Black Mountains. Obvious.
Charlotte's come back for a second question. Charlotte H, which has come my way.
A real grilling.
You won't be able to answer this.
Right.
Will we see a Tour de Ned this year, Ned? A couple of Neds there. We'd love to see you up in the northeast of Scotland. Wow, Tour of Britain special.
I'd love to see you in the northeast of Scotland too, Ned.
Well, I was going to be touring last year, had 30 dates lined up in some of my favourite venues and a new show that I was going to write. And I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I mean, not this year, no. Hopefully next. But I miss it. For anyone who's seen my show, I miss doing it. It's a great deal of fun. That doesn't include you. You've never seen it, never bothered to turn up. I remember there was one night I was at the Lowry Theatre in Salford, sold out, 500 people, brilliant night. And you lot were all working on the track cycling just a couple of miles away up the road. And you had the evening off and you couldn't even be bothered to come and support your mate.
Evening off?
You had the evening off. It was the night before the tournament got underway. And I thought they'll probably ring and ask me for some comps, see if we can get them in. Nothing. Phone didn't. Chris Boardman, not bothered. Actually, Chris turned up once to see the show. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. Burke on a bike. On a bike asks this question: which country do you think will be the next emergent cycling nation?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Well, okay. Well, I think
it's a good question.
Emerged, hasn't it? I think Ecuador's emerged. I don't know Burke on a bike, but what I do think, I know that Ned has worked in Southeast Asia. I have too. I know I've met in my time some wonderful riders from Indonesia, from the Philippines, from what's it called?
Malaysia,
Laos.
Yeah.
I think that part of the world, when I look at that very, very white European peloton, I look at the peloton of the Tour de France, I think, what about those wonderful riders too? I would like to see them there as well. Yep. So Southeast Asia, I would like to see. There's a lot of cycling there and there's real talent.
Yeah, I suppose that's right. The other candidate countries are at war at the moment, Eritrea and Ethiopia. And it just seems to be a mountain too high to climb for these East African riders at the moment. And I don't know, Eritrea in particular, because of its Italian, its connection with Italy, colonial connection down the years, is the obvious place to start. And I think if we're talking about African cycling, then if it'll happen, it'll probably come from either Rwanda or Eritrea, but it doesn't appear to be coming anytime soon. Right, what have we got? Have we got any more questions lined up here, or do I have to start? Yes, we have. Megan Wood, if you could watch any Grand Tour in history, which would it be?
I know what your answer is to this.
Well, I'm not going to say my answer because it's kind of embargoed, but anyway, yeah.
Okay. Oops, shouldn't have said that.
No, you didn't say anything, don't worry.
I would watch. I rather loved the elegance and style of Jacques Anquetil. That said, I know the world tends to go on and on about what a great athlete Eddie Merckx was. I'd rather like to have seen something like the 1930 Giro d'Italia with what's his name? Not, but all the bees, the Italians, with the rider who was 3 times the world champion, who was paid by the Gazzetta dello Sport not to go to the Giro d'Italia, because if he went, he'd just win it. And I forgot his name.
Where in the 1930s?
Yeah.
So pre-Bartoli and after Bottecchia.
Yeah, well, he was
Another
actually
Italian
the Italian national manager in 1949 when Bartoli and Coppi were both riding. So anyway, look at your third screen and find that out.
It would overwhelm me.
Yeah.
It would overwhelm me. It reminds me slightly of that story about Jacques Anquetil and the one-day race in Italy that he used to win post-tour. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I do.
Where he was told he was paid to stay away, and then he changed his mind and went, and then he was paid not to win, and then he was paid an appearance fee. He kind of cashed in 4 times in a row, didn't he? Then let's move to another question. We've got another 5 minutes, I reckon, before we're trying people's patience too much here. Let me work my way at least through these ones. Ed McNally. Can anyone challenge Sam Bennett in sprint finishes this season if his current form continues? Yes, because the sprinter's form can fluctuate massively throughout the season. You were talking about Pascal Ackermann and how he was dominant at the Giro, not last year, the year before. And then it's kind of like, and Demar is absent from the mix at the UAE Tour, and he's in the form of his life as he has been the last couple of years. And I also think
young guy, David Decker, who's coming through, and I think there are lots of that young generation coming through as well.
Jasper Philipsen is the other. He would have been at the UAE Tour had Mathieu van der Poel's team, because he rides for the same team, not had to withdraw after stage 1. And in the bunch sprints, Van der Poel, I'm certain, would have been riding for Jasper Philipsen.
He confirmed that in the pre-race.
There we go. Yes. And that would have been a formidable pairing, actually. And I would imagine Sam Bennett, who encountered Philipsen's talent, let's not forget, at the Vuelta, and paid him huge respect there, and was beaten by him as well on one stage. I think that Sam Bennett would be quite happy that Jasper Philipsen isn't in the bunch at the moment. So
you're right. Actually, and again,
Alfredo Binda.
Alfredo Binda.
Thank you to Burke on a Bike and Ben Williams for coming up with that.
Yeah. I'd love to have seen Binda race, because he's the only rider I know in cycling history who's been paid not to go. Just don't turn up, because otherwise you ruin it. And they could have done the same with Max. They pretty much in Coppi in 52 was so far ahead, they doubled the prize money for second place, so that it became a race for second place, because no one was going to beat him. And those guys. Legends.
Alfredo Binder also gives his name to one of the most underappreciated and unseen and invisible women's races. But if you ask anyone in the women's peloton, they say it's a great race and never gets reported on, never gets shown on the telly. It might as well not be there. But I've never seen, well, I might be wrong, but I've never seen footage of the Alfredo Binder race. Let's move on to Mally Wood's question. Yeah, is that going to pop up on the screen? Yes. If you could be in a team car in any stage, which team and which stage would it be? That's pretty cool. I like that question.
Oh, well, as I said, I'm going to come back. I'm a bearer of very little brain and very little variation, but I must say I would love to be in a team car at the Tour of Flanders, in anyone's team. I mean, I couldn't. It would just be I'd be asking too much to be with Lotto Soudal or with Duconi Quickstep, but just this magical race that I've got where my mum lives on the Essex coast. The local vicar is Belgian, and his wife comes from the Finnish town of the Tour of Flanders, and I quite often go over there and watch it on the telly with them, and she talks me through all the places and all the churches, and as the riders come past, quite often on the telly you can't hear the church bells ring, but it's just, it really transcends sport. It's one of those events that transcends sport and it's about nation building, it's about the imagined communities, it's about people who don't know each other spread out over millions and millions of lives being connected by this extraordinary and wonderful experience. And I think it would also just be magically life enhancing. And I think it's the sort of experience that would allow you to, one of the things I'm very keen on in life, look back at yourself and your identity and your place in the universe, and understand both how small you are, but also how rich and wonderful and exciting this experience of living is.
I'm going to answer that very, very briefly with two team cars and 2 stages. One from last year's tour. I want to have been with Alan Piper in the UAE Team Emirates team car, following Tadej Pogacar up the Planche des Belles Filles and winning the Tour de France, because they knew they would win the Tour de France. That's the thing. They knew they would win the Tour de France. And if you've read Piper's account of how they planned that in this book, which I hope you've all got, then you'll appreciate what I've just said. And the other stages, 2016, 2017 Tour de France, I would like to have been in the Quickstep car with Davide Bramati as they rode up alongside Tony Martin and Julien Alaphilippe, who'd gone on this 2-up attack into Bern in Switzerland.
On the stakes to Bern, yeah.
To Bern. And at first, they were sent up to go and call them back, and Tony Martin simply refused. And Julien Alaphilippe just shrugged his shoulders and went, I can't stop him. Absolutely brilliant. Right.
I love it.
Neil Sharp, do you find male races too formulaic compared to the more attacking freelance style of a lot of female races? Yes.
Yeah.
The best men's races are like the women's races.
Yeah, and the best men's races are the amateur races, actually, the under 23 races, and when it all just, and those things like 4 days of Dunkirk, and those kind of places where it all just falls. Even the Tour of Denmark can be a bit like it, where it just breaks up so much you don't know what's going on, and there are riders everywhere, and that's absolutely brilliant. But it doesn't really happen in. The trouble is, World Tour is a bit like Grandmasters chess. It's, the thing they have in chess is, what is your best move? And in the World Tour, riders very rarely, apart from in the final 100 meters of an absolutely, massive bike sprint, they very rarely do anything other than their best move. And that has an element of boredom about it, I suppose, especially if you don't really understand what they're doing.
3 very quick questions, and that's it. That's the cap on it. And then we have to decide which of the questions you've enjoyed most, Matt, and who gets the book and all that. So Ben Williams is the third from last. Do you think after Sky passed the opportunity by that Ineos would put together a women's team? Now, I don't know, but I don't think there's any appetite for it particularly. And the other thing that I think that we've got to be quite careful with this is, yes, it would be great for the women's peloton to have a massive sponsor like Ineos come in, but you know what they do? They buy everyone. Van der Breggen, Van Vleuten, Lorena Wiebes, Voss, they'd all be charging over there, and because they wouldn't want to do it any other way. If Ineos came in, they'd say, well, we need to win everything, and we need to have all the best riders. And I'm not sure that would be great for the women's peloton right now. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Maybe the best thing they could do is organise some races, a series of races, and that might be a great way of attaching their branding to it, and even a series of under 23 or junior women's races. That would be a stepping stone, and that might be the best way of building the sport.
Alan Collins asks, where would I get a copy, and how many English pounds would I have to part with?
Well, normally you would have to go to Harrods, and it would cost you about £9,999 and 99p. But if you're very lucky, you might be able to find it on such as an online distributor named after a South American forest or something like that. And it might only cost you a little under 20 quid, but there's not many of those ones around. Mostly it's approximately £10,000. So if you see it for under 20 quid, buy it immediately.
Excellent. And finally, SG Cycling asks, who's going to be the surprise new star of 2021?
It
will be a rider by the name of
Kevin Rivera at the Giro d'Italia, riding for Bardiani, the Costa Rican.
Kevin Rivera, the Costa Rican, riding for Bardiani at the Giro d'Italia. And I think this will be the year where Brandon McNulty shows us what he's all about. We got flashes of it at the Giro last year, but he's a rider we both like, isn't he, Matt?
He is. Wow. wow! But he's another of these new humans. God.
Yeah, loads of new humans. Yeah, and in the women's peloton, I'll just end with I think I'm really looking forward to. She's just signed for Jumbo Visma, and she's making a debut at Omloop Het Nieuwsblad. I think she's very young still, even though she's been around for a couple of years. Anna Henderson, the British rider, is immensely capable and will start to win races fairly soon if she's given the chance.
I've got one, Sarah Gigante, I think she's the Australian.
Yeah, the Aussie national champion.
I think she's 21 and an absolute monster, and really hope
is that how you pronounce her name?
Well, I say it's an Italian name, Gigante. I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's if it was Italian. She's
an Aussie though, isn't it? Gigant. Gigant. Yeah, who knows? Okay. Matt?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Question? Thank you very much. We've done all the questions. We're kind of roughly finishing on time, so people can go have their dinner. Yeah, it's been good.
Wonderful questions. Yeah.
And I'm actually quite, from a standing start, we've had 100 people sticking around to the end.
That's wonderful.
Which has been really really good.
Thank you very much.
Now our prizes, Matt.
Yeah.
By the way, no. Just so you know, if Matt calls out your name or refers, he probably can't remember your name, but refers to your question, then you will get a signed copy of his book. And the way you get hold of that is if you could send me the message, Harry, on the private chat, just to remind me of the address. It's office at. I'll get it in a second. But you contact the Roadbook people and send them an email with your details, and they'll get that in the post. Matt, go on.
Yes, well, the very kind gentleman who asked about racism and whether it affects riders from South America, I think it's an extremely important issue. It's very close to my heart, and you gave me the opportunity to speak about something I feel very deeply about. And I'm sorry if it was slightly embarrassing, because seeing someone who genuinely feels emotion about something via the medium of television and these screens can be slightly uncomfortable, but I think it's Stephen Crawford. So Stephen, thank you for your question and for giving me the opportunity to speak about that. And you've got a copy of that for you. So we'll arrange it somehow for you to get that book. So thank you. And thank you everyone for sending in questions. There were some good questions there, and it's great to have this mental exercise. And thank you, Ned, too. Yeah.
Well, I'm picking up on that. The winner of winning, let me show you, a Roadbook Musette, one of these things which contains one of our lovely road exercise books with stickers in and all that sort of thing, plus a Roadbook bookmark, so a little bag of goodies from me for my favourite question. Actually goes to the first one we did, Simon Miller, who asked us, if you remember, about which riders have been overlooked. And I'd like to actually nominate whoever it was who said, yeah, but you a female rider too, and pulled me up on that and made me think that, yes, that's absolutely right. I should have, and I can't remember your name, but we can scroll back and find your name. So 2 prizes, why not? 2 musettes and sets there for that question, because that really made me think about overlooked riders. We're going to do more of these. Can't say when, but they're going to be regular. The editors' meeting is up and running. But henceforth, we've been very public with our invitation this time around. In order to get the invitation to be part of it, please sign up to the Roadbook Society. I know lots of you are members already, absolutely free. And I promise you, we don't bombard you with spam. But every now and again, we will let you know about stuff like this, and you get special offers as well. So the Roadbook Society on the website, just go there, stick your email details in, and we're done. And we're going to be doing these often with a variety of guests, but couldn't rule out roping Matt Rendell back in again. It's time for your dinner, everybody. Matt, it's time for bed. You're 3 hours ahead of us, and I know you've already stuffed your face. Enjoy your.
We'd just like to finish with a chorus of "Come on, everyone, we'll meet again. Don't know where.
Bye.